our last section of this chapter. So a lot of questions, key essential questions, but we'll go through them pretty quickly. And I'm going to expound on them in the activities. I'm sure we just know the basics of these. Redemption is sort of the culmination of this chapter, right? Culmination of this course. Here it is, right in the middle. Chapter 3, talking about what is redemption. Basic questions for this. What part of Christ's life is redemptive? We want to know the answer to that after this. What is the meaning of Christ's hidden life? We want to know the answer to that. What is the power of Christ's words? Is Christ compassionate? And what is justification? A key word that we sometimes hear. We're using a lot of big words, right? We're using redemption. We used atonement earlier. We used expiation. We use what? Reconciliation. These all revolve around the same issue, but not exactly the same. Okay? And lastly, this one, justification. Okay? So these are all key words to know. So we're going to go through these. The first point is that all of Christ's life has a redemptive value. Not just one aspect, but all of it. From his incarnation all the way till he ascends into heaven. Now, what is the redemptive value of Christ's hidden life then? If all of Christ's life, what about between ages 12 to 30 where you hear nothing, right? How is that redemptive? How does that help redeem us, right? Well, because it shows us that even God made man, God is revealing in his very self that ordinary life is okay. It's not just okay. It's what's done. He does it, right? So that even in the ordinary things, there's a means of sanctification. We can look up a few people that talk about that. There's a few big saints. Saint Therese of Lisieux that we just said her feast day. Christ's words have the power to bring conversion. Christ's words are powerful, right? To forgive sins, transform. Christ has compassion for all, not just people in his time, but for people before him and all the way to us, right, and beyond. And lastly, justification is the payment of the debt owed for sin and transforming our souls. And we talked about expiation. Well, justification is the answer. So let's quickly go through. In theology, we got to recognize that a mystery is a key important word, right? A mystery is something that we can never fully comprehend by our reason alone. We need God's help and God's grace to wrap our minds around it, but we can never get to the depth of it, right? The full depth. We're always diving deeper, right? So we can see that a portion of Christ's life, pretty much his entire life, right, we can always get further into. We can always learn more about. So his life itself is the mystery of redemption. That's the title of this course, right? The mystery of redemption. So what is the mystery of redemption? Christ's entire life is the mystery of redemption. And we always highlight his passion, his death, and his resurrection. But from his incarnation through his ascension into heaven, right? His whole life is never fully comprehended. Right? We need grace and we need God's revelation to help our reason to understand redemption. Christ's intervention in history begins not just at the incarnation, not just at the Annunciation, but at creation itself, right? When everything was made through him, the Word, the second person of the Trinity, the Christ, who becomes Jesus, right? God made man in time. Okay. We can say then that Christ, right, because God became man, is like us in every way but sin. And you may ask the question, well, he hasn't played Xbox. He hasn't encountered the things we've encountered. He didn't have to mow a lawn, right? All those things. True, right? There are many different things that we encounter, right, that look very different. Technology, computers, right? But the choices are still the same, right? He still experiences everything we experience, except he doesn't sin where we sin. In his human nature, then, right, he experiences every sort of thing that we experience without getting into sin. Right? He did not program computers. He did not work in that way, but he did do work. So every computer programmer can at least relate to that, right? They work, he works, right? Christ didn't marry, right? But he had a human body, so he goes with the whole idea of attraction of opposite sex, right? Without ever sinning or being inclined to sin towards lust or something else with that regard. Okay? So Christ's human nature, we can see, in a sense, is sacramental in that it shows us how we are to act, right? And it's a sign of what we need to do is cooperate with God's grace. It's a sign of God's grace, God's very life, right? It's also the instrument of receiving God's very life. It's through Christ that we receive grace. That's what a sacrament is, a sign and instrument of something that's invisible. Another way to say it, it's a visible sign of an invisible reality. So what do we mean by that? It is, right, invisible sign, or a visible sign, that is, Christ is God, right, of an invisible reality. What aspects of Christ's life can't be brought to prayer? Now that we talk about this, right, if everything in Christ's life is redemptive, everything of Christ's life is like us in our lives, right, and everything in Christ's life leads us into grace, well, then we can bring to prayer every single aspect of Christ's life, right? All of it we can meditate on and discover more about what redemption's all about and what it means for us to be holy and be redeemed. So some examples of Christ's hidden life and hidden work, right? Hidden life, Christ lived with his family, worked a job, right? Had a circle of friends. So for us, right, we can connect then our lives, putting the last slide and this slide together, right? We can think about that, pray about that, and realize that we can take our everyday activities, right, and also bring them into Christ, make them Christ-like, put them in union with Christ, and so redeem our everyday life, our ordinary life. Just mowing the lawn, right, writing a term paper, being a good friend, right, giving somebody a kind greeting. All of these things are ordinary life, and Christ shows, right, that this can be redemptive if we unite it to him and do it the right way without sin, right? So we can turn all of our activities into a recognition of God and a communication with God. And when we turn all of our activities into a communication with God, all of our activities become prayer. When are we called to pray? We're called to always be at prayer. We can make our everyday life, every moment, a prayer. Prayer is simply communication with God. So when you're sitting here in class or when you're at home listening to this very video, it can be a prayer if you're doing it in the presence of God. And that's what we're called to, right? Recognizing that Christ and his entire life is redemptive, so too we can bring Christ into every aspect of our life, right? So we can do all things out of love of God, which brings us into perfection as much as possible. Even this thing, right? Your calling right now, primary vocation is to holiness, and your calling right now is to be a student at Straight Jesuit. So you're called to be holy as a student, that is to be the best student you can be. So bring Christ into this very moment and bring Christ into your work.